Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And I wish I could come on here and say something positive today, but as you guys know, since I've transitioned from Earthen's Den to Renaissance Room, the entire intention was to educate. And something that I realized just like literally yesterday, I said, oh my God, I have to get off TikTok, right? I was like, this has become nothing more than a distraction. I find myself falling in this web of wanting to be a content creator, wanting to live this kind of like leisurely type of lifestyle, right? Because I believe that is definitely what is promoted on TikTok, right? You see these content creators, they're starting, and it's like, wow, if I could just be consistent and post this content, then I will be able to generate an income for myself. And that's kind of what TikTok has been pushing for me. I've noticed that I've seen like a lot of small time creators on my FYP. A lot of people are starting to kind of take it more seriously. I think this is kind of what happens when we, as consumers, can see how a platform can benefit us and how it's benefited others. We kind of jump on the wave and then, it's kind of late, but nonetheless, we jump on the wave and we try to get that same type of result. And then one thing I realized too, I was watching Mormon's Moms on Hulu. And I always think it's so interesting. Like, obviously, this is the same thing as a reality show. You can kind of akin it to real, hip hop of Atlanta or whatever that show is called. So, there's no privilege in between that per se, but it is very interesting just seeing how these women interact with one another within the church and just all the, I want to say, leeway that they get. I always tell people all the time, for Christianity, for a lot of white Americans, it is justification, right? They feel justified in that. Whereas for Black people, it is a perpetual state of earning your salvation. And a lot of times it's miseducation, right? But it's so interesting to see the different dynamics. But I was coming on here to just kind of talk to you guys about this because I think if you are someone who's seeking education, I don't think TikTok is going to be the platform for that anymore, and if you are someone who's an avid reader and you educate in your communities, I think that now is the time to really lean in and to really honor this communal responsibility, because I just realized that we no longer have educators anymore. The commentary that I'm seeing around Nelly and Snoop Dogg, to me, I'm actually not going to act like, because I think as a collective, it is very troubling. And it is very concerning, right? Because you start talking about the influence. We've talked about this before on a baseline level. Celebrities just perpetually being unaware of their influence and their impact within the Black community and how they take a more individualistic approach, and how we're living in a time today where, because of their influence, right, because of parasocial relationships and social media proxy, we were now living in a state where a lot of people who were amongst the general public, right, within our community, were taking on the same paradigms as the rich and famous. And so when we talk about this collective responsibility of Black communal values and advocating for the Black community, the plot has entirely been lost, right? We have been forced, and rather coerced, to believe in individualism, and that has been passed down to us by celebrities, right? Celebrities don't see themselves as a part of the Black community. They don't see themselves as a part of that collective suffering, and they don't feel responsible for the progression in America, right? They don't feel responsible of carrying that baton, right? They typically are for themselves and they are to themselves, right? And so I think when you're in these communities, you got to think too, right? These celebrities start off, they're famous, and they're famous pretty young, right? So you have a bunch of people who are very ignorant, and you're in these rooms and you don't have the context, and you don't have the language and articulation to microaggressions, and you're aware of racism, but you feel like you shouldn't have to endure racism because you're rich and you can afford the lunches, and maybe they make you feel good sometimes, right? And so what you have is a lot of people who are just simply exploited and taken advantage of because they don't know any better. I truly believe that being racially conscious comes at a cost in America. And that is because it is white supremacy, right? White supremacy, just all the way out through and through. And we talk about this being racially consciousness and the cost that comes to being racially conscious. A lot of times that is you foregoing certain economic opportunities, right? Because of white supremacy, we are still bound, right? That's the plight. It's advocating for Black voices. If you can't articulate it in such a way, or even, be mindful in how you articulate it, you are going to be paying a price, right? And this is why for a lot of content creators who are African American and they may be playing back Black culture, right? We're no longer calling people out for appropriation, but this is exactly why they disassociate themselves from Blackness, right? And it becomes about a collective thing, and they kind of play into politics such as like liberalism and progression, and it's no longer about you. And it's funny because we see this at a very micro level, but it's no different than it being on a very macro level, right? You're no longer authentic. You're no longer someone who stands for something, and that is the cost a lot of times for assimilating within white supremacy, right? You have to become someone who is essentially racially neutral, right? But the crazy thing is a lot of times you are the one of one. So when you go to your communities, when you're interacting with your cousins and so forth, you have to disassociate. I think this is why you have a lot of people who move far away from their hometown, right? This is why you have a lot of that discord rather, that happens within families when these rich people go back to their families, or these influencers go back to their families, because you're met with a very harsh reality, right? And so I understand now that this is no longer a collective responsibility, right? It's no longer a collective responsibility for African Americans to be racially conscious and for celebrities to uphold something other than materialism. And the reason why they're not able to do this is, one, because of a lack of education in terms of just racial consciousness and awareness, right? But two, because there's too much on the line. Right. And so this is what happens when you kind of have a society where you have a lot of millionaires and you have a lot of billionaires. Right. The things that matter. Right. It's like the people who are left in the general public are left to kind of defend themselves. And there's a lack of education, obviously, because there's a lack of resources and opportunity. And that's kind of like the fallout of that. So it was never really a matter of like, and I guess that's kind of like breaking down when people talk about like the oligarchy. And to my understanding, of oligarchy essentially is just where you have a bunch of rich people running things. Something I am working on learning a little bit more about is just a different type of like structures within government and so forth, because as y'all know, I told y'all in the beginning, like politics is a white man's game, but I also understand that now is the time to kind of really press in and to learn more. So I look forward to being more educated in regards to politics, but it's definitely not my mojo. So I just kind of wanted to share what I think it means. And so so essentially that's the byproduct of like conversations around generational wealth and conversations around, money and et cetera, like that's the byproduct. You get individualism and you get people who disassociate, and, to be in a general space, to be able to educate people and talk to them about communal issues and what's really going on. It's like a foreign language. If you're in social media, if you're online specifically, TikTok, or just like large platforms, educating people about racial dynamics, racism, inequality, and so forth is a taboo thing, especially when you start talking about African Americans. The vast majority of people who are being impacted, right, African Americans, that's when it becomes a problem. But if you can kind of keep it progressive and you can say, well, we're all suffering, we're all X, Y, and Z, even when that's not true, they say that even when white people are poor, they still make significantly more than Black people. They still do significantly better than Black people. So it's always just interesting that we like to kind of group people in together, and we like to kind of be like, we're all fighting for the same thing, and we're not, right? Because there's still somebody who is still disproportionately disenfranchised. And so these conversations, I just think that, you have to be so mindful of. You can't really have them out in the general public anymore. I think the cost moving forward is going to get a little bit greater. I think that TikTok and social media has become one of the greatest distractions. I think that we are in a time now where it's just really no reason to be so invested in celebrities anymore. I just think that they do more harm than good. And I think that it is incredibly dangerous to follow after their influence and to kind of just like, really heed to any platform that they have, because it's incredibly distracting. You will find yourself slipping and finding yourself kind of wanting to migrate into those values. And the reason why is because you want to be liberated from your oppression, right? You want to be liberated from the things that you're going through in your life. And so you'll find yourself wanting to gravitate towards certain content creators, wanting to gravitate towards certain celebrities, because you believe that if you can just kind of disassociate from yourself, from your blackness, right, that you'll have a better chance at obtaining a piece of the pie. And it's not true. And I don't think that we really weigh the cost of that. So I think that Snoop Dogg and Nelly are the epitome of this. And I think if anything, we should look at this, and if you don't even understand it from a political standpoint, but just understand the humiliation, right? You've got Elon Musk signing off with, Nazi, and to me, this doesn't come as a surprise. And I think this is why I always break it down to such a very fundamental, simplistic, and I break it down to a very fundamental level, but I provide such a simplistic explanation of the differences between white culture and black culture, because we need to understand that white culture is a culture, right? We like to talk about black culture. We like to get our hands in the nitty gritty of ghetto and all these different things. And we love the aesthetics and we love the fashion, but you have to understand that white culture is indeed a culture. So to me, it doesn't come as a surprise that the vast majority of white people would look to historical acts of genocide and violence, right? Because that is their nature. It has always been something that is, colonizing and murderous, right? So that doesn't come as a surprise to me. And this is why it's so important to understand the fundamentals of the different differences between the cultures, right? When Obama was our president, I don't care what anybody says. We don't have to go into politics, but we can very, very much generally look at a baseline, and we can clearly see that people were pretty loving. People were pretty loving. There wasn't so much hate. It wasn't so overt. It wasn't something that was socially acceptable, right? Even just within the general public, right? There was a sense of peace, okay, and harmony between people, LGBTQ. It was a different time. It was a different time. But what do we have now, right? Now that we are under Trump's leadership, what do we have now? Hate, chaos, right? And it's so interesting that this is when we talk about righteousness and Christianity and God and what it means for white people versus what it means for black people. You can clearly see how Trump feels so justified in this, right? But you can very evidently see just by this person's actions that it is not of God. It is not loving. I don't see how any Christian could perpetuate that, but again, white churches, black churches, it's a completely different message. We're not living in the same world. It is not a universal God. It is not a universal teaching, right? White Americans feel very justified in what they do and how they act, and even in the hate crimes that they commit and so forth. And this is what you have with Donald Trump. I think the other thing too that is genuinely heartbreaking and discouraging is to just realize how many black people really vote for Trump, and they have no understanding. They have absolutely no understanding of the politics and what it means, and what are the implications and what this looks like for their communities, right? They have no implications of DEI, and that we don't take into account all of the jobs that were created, as well as the opportunities for a lot of black people in corporate America. There was a point in time where it was actually pretty challenging, right? And so all the work that is being done is actually being undone. And this is something that has been continuous within American society. You can take the very significant example of Black Wall Street, right? So that's what you have today in modern time, but it's just a little bit more systemic. It's a little bit more lawful, and it's not as overt as a bombing. But that's essentially what you have today. And that has been the continual plight of African Americans. It's just, unfortunately, I believe that we are being influenced to no longer have a desire to rebuild. And this is becoming entirely concerning because when I look at the community centers, when I go out into the world, I'm seeing the impacts on our community in real time. Okay. I'm seeing it in real time. Not everybody is out here with a side hustle doing X, Y, and Z. No, I'm seeing it in real time, and it is nasty work. And we are the ones who are being highly and significantly and disproportionately rather impacted. And so this is real. So if I believe that if you really want education regarding certain things, it's time to deprogram yourself. Right. And I think even when you look at the algorithmically, when it comes to TikTok, who's educating you, right? Because if a lot of times, hey, you have a lot of white Americans who will get on TikTok and they will try to educate you regarding things, but they will do it in a way that is progressive and produces a false sense of liberalism when that's not really the case, right? I think this is why Black educators are so important. Okay. And I think this is also why you need people at the ground level educating as well. So if you're an educator, if you are someone who likes to read books, you like to make content or whatever the case may be, this is just a message to you to just say, hey, listen, now is the time to really lock in if you're going to be out here creating content and educating people, because we are needed now more than ever.